So you and Misha both talked about teams and importance of team. And now then comes the next logical question: how do I find people to build a team with or to company with? So any ideas, any tips?
I think it's a really great question and I think in order to answer that properly, you've got to be self-reflective and look at what your strengths and your weaknesses are and be really honest with yourself. And the more honest you are about that, the better able you're going to be to find a complementary team that will help you through it. You're not, on a path of entrepreneurship or in any path in your life, you're never going to be able to do this alone. You have to find out what you bring to the business, but actually what else does the business need from you? And that will mean hiring people that are complementary, and you've got to hire the best people. I think all too often ego comes in the way, and we've got to be have a lot of humility and hire the best people. And sometimes those people are better than you, but you want people better than you. You should want better people than you, so that you can propel your business to go further. There's no point having sort of mediocre people just to make yourself feel better. It's really, really important to have the right individuals that complement you, your characteristics, your personality, all of those other soft skills as well as the hard skills.
Well, I have to say, there's a lot of debate going on in the chat, so we're obviously hitting on a nerve. So Dominic, I will come to you to sort of give your perspective as well as the perspective from the professors before we go on to the audience, because MJ is going to look at the chat. They're going to see questions from the audience and direct them to each of you wonderful speakers today with such excellent points. Dominic, what are your thoughts? We've not spoken to you in a little bit, so I just want to see what you'll wrap up.
Great. Well, I was reflecting as we went, and I was very struck by what we were hearing about risk and de-risking, and also the theme of resilience, personal resilience. So when we come down to risk, I think of my contemporaries who continued to plough a much steadier furrow than me, coming to be partners in Boston Consulting Group or McKinsey. Some of them are still there. I've got some good friends in Magic Circle law firms. All of them, by the way, are divorced. In most cases, multiple times. And while I'm not aware of any of them having drug problems, I am aware of some of their children having drug problems. So that says to me that the question of how you manage risk and how you manage personal resilience is extremely important in any environment where you're kind of giving it your all, as you need to do if you want to succeed in any respect, whether we're talking about $1 million or whether we're talking about breakthrough in meditation practice. These things do push us to the edge. So the question is then about risk and resilience. And just speaking personally, and I touched on network, which I know is one of the questions that's been bubbling up. I've found that that is extremely important to me, both in considering risk and considering my personal resilience. You know, who do I turn to? Who have I got around me? Our former dean, Andrew Lickerman, wrote quite a nice piece on judgment in Harvard Business Review at the end of last year. And he was saying, if you really want to develop sound judgment, you won't do this in isolation. We're social creatures, and indeed we're socially constructed. So are you surrounding yourself with clowns? That was a wonderful expression of his. Are you surrounding yourself with clowns? Or are you surrounding yourself and building a network of people who can provide encouragement, which rang a bell with someone, the right kind of challenge, and bring resources? Because I'm absolutely with Alenka, setting out on an entrepreneurial track on my own without resources, maybe without a bit of the bank of mum and dad or previous employers behind to provide support, is an incredibly lonely ride. And we might want to be interesting to hear from you, Misha, and you, Daniel, how you dealt actually with the solitary nature sometimes of being an entrepreneur, what you did about it. And I'm also personally very, very fortunate to be, in the London Business School community. We're very privileged as adjunct faculty to have this wonderful home, LBS, working with people like you, with colleagues like Alenka and Brian. And at the same time, we have freedom to go off and experiment and venture. And I don't think I would ever really have had the courage to do some of the things I've done without that community called London Business School. So it might be worth thinking in that sense, back to the question of risk, whether in an entrepreneurial setting as such, or in what appears to be a quote unquote less entrepreneurial setting, how we might actually, in pragmatic terms, deal with those two challenges. Because then, back to you, Alenka, there's always a distribution, isn't there? And we never want to be average. We want to be on the right side of that curve. So what might be the factors that would influence where we might lie on that distribution?
No, we already know Olenka's right. So, you know, that's fine. So I look forward to being in the breakout room with her to learn more where I've gone so horribly wrong. But in the meantime, we're going to give it to the audience. So MJ has got some questions from the audience in the chat. I can see Andre Costa, I can see Ian, I can see Santiago, I can see Yora, I can see Toby, I can see all these different questions and Janita from all these different people. So MJ, over to you to filter and I'll let you direct the flow from audience to different speakers.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna ask Toby in a moment to ask his question, but I want to ask Daniel. Daniel, if someone would have asked me to describe you, I would say you're like the kingmaker, the entrepreneur maker. So my question to you, someone who is entrepreneurship or an entrepreneur born to be an entrepreneur, or can you make someone into an entrepreneur?
I think it's both. And the good news is that everyone is born with natural talents that can be strengths. A successful entrepreneur surrounds themselves with people who are going to complement their weaknesses. So the good news is everyone's kind of born. I've got 3 kids under 6. They are natural risk takers. They're natural. They pitch ideas, really high pitch ideas all the time. And, you know, they do all of the kind of things. They're very much into understanding risk to reward ratios and trying to access rewards that are out there. So we're all born with those kind of qualities. The actual mechanics of entrepreneurship can absolutely be taught and taught well. And I use the example of the airplane that I said it's statistically difficult to be in an airplane. If you look at there's 4 million people in an airplane and 7 billion people on the ground. And there's actually just a process for buying a ticket and turning up to the airport and getting on the plane and showing your passport and all that sort of stuff. There's a step-by-step process. There is actually, to a degree, there is actually a lot of very predictable parts to entrepreneurship that you can go through and predictable disciplines, and you can learn the skill. And of course, if you're trying to get a massive breakthrough overnight, it's probably not going to happen, but you absolutely can learn the key components of entrepreneurship.
Okay, that's great. Toby? Toby is a fellow EMBA. He's in the London stream, EMBA LJ 2021. Go ahead, Toby.
It's been an amazing conversation. Thanks everybody for participating. I think happiness versus the pursuit of financial wealth has really been a theme of my life, certainly over the last 5 years of my career. I know how it started off. And Alenka, I definitely correlate or empathize with your family full of entrepreneurs, hence why I pursued the corporate life. But I have this burning sort of smoldering fire, I know, inside of me, sort of wanting to create, build, inspire. And Rupert, you really gave some great points. And so my question is directed at Daniel or Rupert or anybody. I feel that I'm very strong in certain areas, but I'm very weak in other areas. And so how have you coached people or seen people or whatever it is in enabling people like me and anybody else on this webinar to choose or find that first business partner? Because doing it alone is just not an option for me.
Did you want me to?
Yeah, Daniel, why don't you go first, and then Rupert can give his opinion as an ex-partner from BDO.
I've had some wonderful business partners, and I've also had some terrible times. I had a business partner that we weren't aligned. He wanted a lifestyle business. I wanted a performance business, and we had a very messy breakup that cost a lot of money. And actually, it took me 5 years to pay him out, which was just horrendous. Trying to grow a business and pay off a massive earnout as well. And it's an important one to get right. And the most important thing is to really be aligned around the vision, to have really good working agreements between the two of you, and to kind of utilize people who could act as counselors or coaches for the relationship as it unfolds, so that you can deal with any niggles early, as opposed to letting them fester. The other thing that I've personally found that makes things very difficult is when one of you or both of you get married or have children, because values change really fast when that happens. So one of the biggest, most difficult things that I see is that two co-founders are massively aligned when they're single, and they've got no other commitments, and then one of them gets married and has kids, or both of them get married and have kids, and all of a sudden everything shifts, and there's a huge, it's one of the rockiest times that you can go through as partners. So it's important to kind of deal with that in advance as well, and have some thinking around that too.
Okay, well, sounds like it's my turn, doesn't it?
Yes.
And after I was an accountant, I picked up an HR qualification as well. So I'm the unusual accountant who, in theory, knows about people, or I'm the even more unusual HR person who knows the difference between a 2 and a 5. Though in reality, neither of those propositions are true, of course. Yeah, I mean, Daniel, so good. Daniel, you should bottle all of that, put it in an article, because everything you say is absolutely on the nail. I think if I can do little other than to build on some of that, or emphasize and underline some of that. I think you need to distinguish between what you found a business with, or rather who you found a business with, and who you grow a business with. And the two take our thoughts in different directions. When you're founding a business, you want to found a business with somebody. There are exceptions to every rule, but one of the ways of not being lonely in business, Dominic, is to make sure you don't found the business on your own. You found it with somebody else. So the team act right at the beginning. And indeed, research does tell us that businesses founded by teams grow further, grow faster, and more likely to survive, more likely to raise money, etc., than businesses founded by individuals. What sort of individuals? Well, I think what Daniel is talking about in terms of aligning your interests, your objectives, is important. So many founders find themselves founding not as a matter of deliberate act, because it's just what sort of happens. I remember working with a team of 3 computer engineers. They're working on early growth issues. Actually, I write about it in one of my books, so some of you might have read it. But 2 of the guys, very ambitious to grow. They were after their million, to use that language. The other guy, he was happy shooting pool. He was happy fixing computers. He was a member of the founding team, but he didn't want this growth thing. He just wanted to shoot pool on Thursday evening, watch the football on Friday evening, and watch the rugby on Saturday evening. He didn't want any of that stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you don't let it get in the way or force a sense of disagreement between yourselves as a founding team. And of course, what you're talking about there is things that are so often not talked about, and these are the difficult things. So having somebody to mediate, as Daniel said, so important. Who is that person? Well, if you're raising money, you'll get the mediation anyway in the form of a non-exec, a board, a governance structure, and all of that sort of stuff. If you're financing this business yourself, some of those disciplines you're going to have to force on yourself, rather than have forced on you by somebody else. Taking those disciplines, making the time for that degree of professionalization in terms of documentation, relationships with you and your founders is so important. I'm in business with my friends, so I don't need to worry about that. Yes, you do, particularly if you do. I suggest that many husbands and wives fall out over the business because they haven't taken the business documentation seriously. I'm in business with my wife. We haven't got a prenup for the marriage, but we have got a partnership agreement for the business. So maybe that tells you something. Incidentally, we've been married for 33 years, so we buck that rule as well. And then you've got growing the business. And of course, when you're growing the business, you're recruiting people to your team who are not entrepreneurial. And I think there's a whole set of issues here that we need to bottom out. Just because you're entrepreneurial doesn't mean everybody else is going to be entrepreneurial. Just because you're creating an entrepreneurial business doesn't mean that you need to recruit entrepreneurial people. Indeed, part of growing an entrepreneurial business is to turn an entrepreneurial business into something that's no longer entrepreneurial by recruiting the normal human beings, the normal ones, to complement the abnormal human beings, and the abnormal ones, the entrepreneurs, not the other way around. And when you're recruiting normal people, most normal people want to do an honest day's work. They want to get paid. They want their holiday. They're not motivated by this million thing, not motivated by the obsession that you have for your business subject, or selling sandwiches, or writing code, or whatever it is that made you create this thing in the first place. They will think differently from you, but then the business is going to be changing. And what happens then is you as entrepreneur become a constraint on the growth of your own business. Of course, you have another complication then, which is that you as entrepreneur end up changing. You get older, you have kids, you get wiser, you get stupider, you get wealthier. Your attitude to risk changes as well. So you've got those lines in parallel. You've got the evolution of the business. You've got the evolution of the individuals within the business. You've got the recruitment of the more individuals. Let's add on it. You've got the evolution of the market that you are in and the industry that you're in, certainly if you're in a high-tech business. You've got a business that's growing up as well as growing. You, an individual, are growing up as well as growing. Wrap all that up together, life becomes pretty complicated. Pretty exciting and fun as well, I think. But I don't know who I am. But that's some comments there that somebody might find helpful. I hope.
Professor Merson has a book, Growing a Business, Strategies for Leaders and Entrepreneurs. I enjoyed that book, and I'd recommend people to read it. I liked Yore. Yore, you're here. You had an interesting question. Yes. in the chat. I wonder if you can ask it maybe to Professor Alanka.
Hello. Yes, of course. So my question was fairly simple, actually, in the way that we were discussing that either we have two choices: lead a wealthy life, miserable, divorced, on drugs potentially, or decide to go for a calm family life and be poor or not so successful. To me, this kind of reasoning is silly. I mean, why do we have just these two options? To go a little bit back to Rupert, yes, it's true, but George Bernard Shaw said the development depends on the unreasonable man. So I was thinking, is there a sweet spot? So we all know that we're here because none of us wants a divorce, but we could all enjoy some comfort of $1 million or $2. So how do we find that sweet spot? Is it as cliche as follow your inner passion or things like that? What is it? Which recipe to follow? So that was basically my rambling.
I never really saw it as a trade-off between rich versus miserable. It's just about finding a safer path to be rich. And so, at least based on my own research, what I have found is that one path that people often overlook is being an intrapreneur, right? So this idea that you can still act like a founder, you can still build products, you can still develop businesses, but just in a more de-risked way, and that's through intrapreneurship. So this idea that if you, for example, work, in a big high-tech company, and you have an idea, rather than just leaving and doing it on your own and taking a bunch of employees with you, well, you can instead approach your employer and just share the risk with them, ask for resources. So that's at least one way to think about finding the sweet spot or finding a better equilibrium, right? Where you just don't have to take on the risk yourself, but you can also still reap some rewards. I think that's something that I have found in my research people tend to overlook. Now, the other path that also works for people is if you truly have this yearning, and people here talked about, finding your passion and having this yearning for becoming a founder, then possibly another way to do it is just to then go back to paid employment after you get it out of your system. And so I actually researched and studied people who go back to paid employment, having failed or having succeeded in entrepreneurship. And so under some conditions, especially when you think about companies that appreciate or value entrepreneurial talent, and there's plenty of them, then that can be a really nice career path as well, because in that case, you're coming in as someone who's going to have those differentiated skills, someone who can bring in the entrepreneurial view and skills, but at the same time, right, like you're not a corporate man anymore. So for a lot of organizations, you're offering huge value add by being someone with entrepreneurial experience later in their life. And then I think finally, going to Rupert's point, I guess this idea of, well, do you actually have to grow? The growth orientation that he was talking about. So there is this very well-known trade-off in entrepreneurship. It's about being king versus rich. And so rich is all about growing multiple ventures and giving up control and seeking VC funding and just deriving a lot of utility from making millions, right? But there's another pathway, which is about just being a king. And in that case, you don't necessarily have to give up all the control. Probably you're more satisfied with more modest earnings, but then you've created a life for yourself. And so this has meaning beyond just making money, right? This is more about your baby. I mean, an entrepreneurial venture is eventually going to become your baby, and that's what's going to shape what matters to you in the end. And so that could be another way of thinking about that as well. So hopefully it's not all about trade-offs here, but rather being really aware of what the different options are and finding one that really works for you.
Thank you, Professor. Is Hassan A. Jassim online? I don't know. He asked a question that was interesting. Yeah, you're there. You can, Hassan. Okay, there we go. You go ahead, please.
Yeah. First, thank you guys all for the information. I was asking about you talk about the entrepreneurship. Is it applicable to the notion of scalable professions only? I wonder if there is any information about that.
Maybe Paul, can you take that? So I guess scalable and non-scalable jobs.
Yeah, I think if you're, again, working in a large organization, you're going to rely on other people to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. You're going to be managing teams. So I think that's I guess, one element of scalability. It's not just you and your efforts individually, adding to the corporate pot. You're expected to get the best out of people. And that's what leadership is, right? Using the best of what you have to get the best out of other people. So in a leadership role, you're expected to get the best out of your team and grow a business. So I guess I would say that's a definition of intrapreneurship. And you can see that in lots of different organizations, whether it's in an advisory firm, in a tech firm, any organization, a leader is expected to try to get the best out of their people to grow a business. So I think that's intrapreneurship, or one definition of it.
Okay.
What do we think?
Hassan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, partially. I have another question, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
Does this apply also to the non-scalable profession? I mean, the non-scalable profession is an ordinary profession. You go higher in the hierarchy of the organization. Is that also possible with the path to the first million?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but what I would say, thinking about non-scalability, if you're a lawyer or an accountant and your hourly rate is £500 an hour, £1,000 an hour, it's going to probably be a little bit more difficult to get to the million if you're just an individual contributor.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what you mean? Yeah. I guess the more rarefied your skills and the more demand your skills are required, I guess depends on the price point. And then we're going to get into economics, right? Supply and demand and so on. So You know, I guess there are some YouTube influencers out there who are highly in demand for a period of time, and they can charge very high rates to do what they do. I'm not sure that answers your question.
Okay, well, we'll move on. I have a question to Misha. That there was some mention in the chat about how women have it more difficult as entrepreneurs. Well, you know, what's your take on this? Can you give us insights from your experience? And then finally, I have Santiago that I'll cue in after you're done. Misha?
Hi. So it's interesting. I was the only. I was in a minority of founding partners when we first started Fontes Health, and to be honest, I don't really let that kind of stuff get to me. I want to be judged on my merit and not what's between my legs or what lacks between my legs. And so I just find all of that completely nonsensical. And for me, I had stuff to bring to the table, and I was respected for it. And in situations where I'm not, I make the point very clear that sexism is unacceptable. But I try not to get myself caught up in this kind of stuff, because for me it's just irrelevant. I want to go to work, perform, and do the best that I can for my business. And these things, I try not to let it get me down. But that's not to say that sexism doesn't exist in the workplace, and that it doesn't exist when you're starting your own business or in the corporate world. It does, and there's a lot more work that we need to do about that, and get more equality for anyone who feels othered. It's not just about sexism. There are lots of inequalities in the business world, and we should strive to make things a more level playing field. So I hope that answers your question.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I guess the lesson is, you know, just drive through. Don't allow people to put you in a place and prevent you from doing what you think is the right thing. Santiago, I think we'll end with you, and then we'll go to breakout rooms. Stephanie?
Yes, that's right. So we'll take one last question from Santiago, and then we'll go into breakout rooms, and all of the speakers can have a little break and then continue.
Thank you, MJ. Thank you, Stephanie. This has been a very enlightening, very, very exciting talk. But I would like for us to move a little bit up towards innovation and being a little bit more disruptive and in an innovation-driven type of LBS business-oriented person, and do this thing that we are taught at LBS, but like, for example, by Francois, the dean, Success Square, create sustainable, purposeful impact on society. And that involves also creating wealth for yourself and for others, right? Building networks and people. And I think some in the audience are talking about the book answers, but I would like to go back to innovation. And why are we not talking about being more innovative and using internet and digital assets, and more of what Daniel Priestley is preaching, that I am a firm subscriber. It's not only Daniel, others preach the same thing, right? We all have access to the web, to the internet. We all can create ideas, products, services that solve a problem that others want to pay for, and create businesses. Why are we not doing that? Why are we all focused on being a partner, earning $1 million? Guess what? Not all partners make $1 million. I'm already a partner in a consultancy firm, and I don't make $1 million. I make less. I'm well paid, but not $1 million. I'm aspiring for more. So I could like to hear more from people like Daniel that are more innovative and more driven to leverage the digital assets, the funding from the government, the funding from BCP to create digital presence that is sustainable, fail faster, fail better? How do we do that? Let's hear the tips, please, if that makes sense.
One thing, if I'll comment on that, is that it's an incredible time to be an entrepreneur because the world is going through so much change and so much transformation and so many problems. Entrepreneurship at its core is solving meaningful problems and doing it in a commercial way. One of the things that I'm most passionate about is using the United Nations Global Goals as a framework to identify the world's biggest humanitarian and social and environmental problems, and then trying to find a scalable entrepreneurial solution to some of those problems that the world needs solving by 2030. And one of the most rewarding forms of entrepreneurship is when you actually start with a massive, meaningful problem that the world needs to have solved, and then you try and work backwards from there. In the 1900s to 2000s, the world needed a lot of consumable stuff, shoes and jeans and guitars and, you know, PCs and computers and all that sort of stuff. And I think that the next great boom in entrepreneurship kicked off really in 2020 is that actually the greatest opportunities for entrepreneurship now are not necessarily consumable products and those sorts of things. It's actually solving the world's most meaningful problems, the big environmental, social, societal problems. And there's huge money in solving this stuff, huge money in solving this stuff.
I just want to say thank you to all of the professors. You all have relevant research papers, and it would be wonderful if you have time, inclination, and excessive generosity, as you always do. If you have links to the various research papers, there's a huge demand coming in for, I want to read what he said, what she said, what they said. So if I can include an email with the links, and then everyone can read or whatever they want, that would be wonderful if you want, but that's fine. I don't want to give you more. You've been so generous with your time.
So hi, yeah, I'm an alumni. I did my MBA 85 to 87, so I've been in business, 30 odd years. Question I've got is, great conversation, agree with a lot, agree with some and disagree with some, as always. My question, a lot of the conversation I think was retrospective, i.e. pre-COVID, in terms of the opportunity set, the ease of making $1 million, etc., etc. How do people view the post-COVID world where funding is going to be much tighter? We will have unemployment. We will have companies going into administration. The opportunities may be there in certain sectors, but they are definitely not there in some of the mainstream sectors that traditionally have helped hospitality, for example. I just wanted to put forward a view that maybe what we've been saying is a bit of a pre-COVID rhetoric. Thoughts?
Yeah, but it's a pre-COVID rhetoric because we're still in the middle of COVID, aren't we? And human beings are conditioned and condemned to look backwards. Though I would suggest that entrepreneurs, again, part of the unusual part of being an entrepreneur is you're more inclined to look forwards than you are to look backwards, which is why you've got a different attitude towards risk. Certainly, if we are going to look backwards, one thing we can learn looking backwards is that every other previous crisis has been a hotbed for entrepreneurial activity. It might not look like it at the time, but research does tell us that businesses founded in times of crisis do better than businesses that are founded in times of plenty. They probably need to, you would argue, because some of the resources are more difficult to come by, and they've got to be, a lot more switched on to succeed than when money is sloshing around the system. Where those opportunities lie, of course, depends on your take on the current crisis. And I suppose I've had to give some thought to this because I gave a webinar a few weeks ago on the subject of entrepreneurial opportunity in crisis. Anyway, and the subtitle of our session was "Don't Waste a Good Crisis," which was perhaps unnecessarily flippant. And at the time I said I don't want to pay a lack of respect to those people who've had serious trouble as a consequence of this crisis. But looking at in economic terms, certainly big businesses are going to suffer. Big businesses are suffering. Some big businesses will do okay, some will do well out of it, but a lot of big businesses will suffer. Unemployment is going to soar. We haven't seen anything yet. Entrepreneurial opportunities will be created. Entrepreneurs will be created as well. They might not want to be, but they are going to be created, loosed onto the market without a job to do and needing to do something else to earn an honest crust to keep themselves alive on this planet. Add those things together and we've got every reason to look forward. What are we going to be looking forward at? Well, I think first of all you need to distinguish between short-term opportunities that are going to fizzle out when the world returns to some form of normality, which it will. History does tell us again that the world will return to some form of normality. I don't believe all of these headlines that tell us that the end of the world is nigh, that the world is never going to be the same again. Yes, it is. People are still going to eat, they're still going to have sex, they're still going to make families, they're still going to put clothes on their bodies, they're still going to do all of these things that we've always done. Are they going to do them in fundamentally different ways? Well, yeah. Of course, there is going to be apparently a 2-meter rule in UK public houses for a while. That isn't going to last forever. I suggest it's probably going to last about to the end of the first round of drinks on the first evening it's been opened before we start slipping back into a normal way of doing things again. So some businesses, let's not give up on, they will come back. Secondly, there are going to be some businesses that are not going to survive, quite possibly because they shouldn't have survived anyway. And there's been a lot of hangover since the financial crisis when we all waited for a lot of businesses to go bust and they didn't. Maybe they should have gone bust then, and maybe now they're going to be finally put out of their misery, or perhaps looked at another way. That gives rise to a different type of entrepreneurial opportunity, turnaround entrepreneurial opportunity, picking up good businesses, turning around, pointing them in the right direction, refinancing them, putting a bit of energy and excitement back into them. That's going to happen as well. Then you've got entrepreneurial opportunities that are genuinely as a consequence of a shift in the tectonic plates, which is my favorite metaphor for this sort of thing. You know, the land is going to lie differently in some regard. Where that is, well, you know, we're all intelligent people on this call. Our guess is as good as each other's. My bets are in and around shaking up things that should have changed again, that maybe have not changed, but as a consequence of this COVID crisis, we can see, they can change. What am I talking about? I'm talking about primary healthcare delivery, finally shifting this glorious National Health Service that we've got out of 1969 into hopefully 2008. We'll say 2020 till the 21st century. I don't want to be rude about the National Health Service. It's a huge savior in times of difficulty, of course, but as an institution and as an organization, there must be huge opportunities for transforming certainly the way we deliver primary healthcare service delivery. And a lot of entrepreneurs are sniffing around that sort of space and seeing what can happen. You know, Babylon's been in existence for numerous years now, but off the back of that, I think attitudes will change to make that sort of thing happen. Then, of course, there's a whole host of things in and around this experience. We're doing this online, aren't we? Only 9 months ago, everybody would have turned up to some sort of event at LBS and had a sniff of beer in the first half, then a talk, then a networking event afterwards. Will that never happen again? Of course, it will happen again, but there will be more space for this sort of opportunity, which will give way for different ways of doing this sort of thing. I look for other organizations that maybe are going to take a kick towards a newish way of doing things as a consequence. Education, you know, those of us that are school kids struggling with, well, one day in school every 4 days at the moment, my 17-year-old is going through. What's going to happen to that when that settles down? FinTech, heard a lot about, haven't seen much in reality as far as the big financial institutions are concerned. Finally, I think as a consequence of this, there's going to be a big change in the pace of change in that part of the economy. I am myself looking forward to going back to London Business School, not by tube, but way of motor scooter. I bought it already. I've got the L plates. It just makes me think it's another area of the economy where the world is going to change a bit, and you only need lots of a bits to give rise to whole hosts of entrepreneurial opportunity for people. That was also true in 2010. That was also true in 1918, 1920, in the last big flu pandemic. It will also be true in 2027, or when the next big crisis is going to be. And, you know, I would suggest that history tells us that the unusual thing about the last 100 years is that we've only had one earth-shattering health crisis since 2018, and that's this one. And the real issue is not whether it's going to come again. It will, nor when it's going to come again, but let's assume it's going to come a lot quicker than 100 years' time. Could be just around the corner, because historically that's what's tended to happen. Here ends the rant. The key question is, a lot of people think that I'm doing okay, I'm making more than enough, and then how do I leave my comfort zone? What's your take on that? Why should you? If you're doing all right, if you're comfortable, who says you've got to leave anything? Don't forget that most you've got to create entrepreneurs as well as you've got to create entrepreneurial opportunities. Now, some entrepreneurs are born, I accept that. Some people turn into entrepreneurs. Some people are forced into entrepreneurial activity. Let's not forget that there are hundreds of millions of people around the world who are entrepreneurial, not because they want to, but because they're unemployed otherwise. They've either got to set up a chapati store on a corner in Mumbai, or they don't eat that day. There's an interesting study that suggests that entrepreneurs compared to employed people in developed economies are happier, but the entrepreneurs compared to employed people in emerging markets and frontier markets are unhappier. There's an interesting flip there as to why people do entrepreneurship. Most people do entrepreneurial activity in the developed world, at least because there is some willingness on their part to do that. You know, in the current crisis, people are going to be made unemployed. They are going to get their redundancy packages, and some of those will use those packages to look for another form of employment. Some of those are going to look for an entrepreneurial activity and spend their money that way. But there's going to be an attitude about wanting to do it as well. I would say to anybody who is comfortable, happy where they are, who says you've got to change? You know, stick at what you've got, my friends.
Okay, so my question for Professor Rupert is linked to, can you do both, you know, your 9 to 5 and also have a little bit of entrepreneurship on the side?
A little bit on the side, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, I think, you know, as I said at the beginning, I'm an artist, and I can tell you everything is possible. I suppose the real issue is whether it's desirable or not. I firmly believe that you increase your chances of success at anything on this planet as an individual if you focus, and the more you spin lots of plates, the more danger you have that all of those plates are going to come crashing down. It's interesting to contrast institutional financiers, venture capitalists, private equity funds, and entrepreneurs. Financiers can reduce their risk by doing lots of things at once and investing in lots of different ventures. Entrepreneurs can't do that, or if they do, the effect is not the same. I think that an entrepreneur increases his chances of success by focusing. A financier increases his potential return and reduces his risk by not focusing, by doing precisely the opposite. However, we've got to be pragmatic here. For those of us who want to create a business, who haven't been fortunately made redundant with a nice large sum of money to eke away the next 6 months or so, we've got to do something to earn our living and to pay the mortgage and to, you know, pay for the kids' food and all the rest of it. For many of us, though I might say you'll increase your chances of success by focusing on your venture, they'll turn around and say, well, I've got to do this 9 to 5 job, because that's the only way I'm going to keep my self together. So the real question is not what's right, not what's good, not what's advisable, but what you're going to have to do on this planet. And entrepreneurship, far more than politics, I always think, is the art of the possible and the pragmatic, not the art of the theoretical. You know, somebody once said that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. And your question gets at the heart of a key example of that, I think.
To be honest, I think the risk mitigation is it's logical to think that you can do a 9 to 5 and then mitigate the risk by having something on the side. And I was coming from it from a, that's what in business, in finance, you're made to have multiple options.
Yeah.
Then,
and that's right. That's the portfolio effect, and that's what investors can do rely on. Entrepreneurs can't do that, or not nearly the same way. And I think there were sorts of consequences of that. It means that entrepreneurial financiers can quite typically have a more aggressive attitude to risk at the individual business level than the entrepreneur will. A VC will often put pressure on an entrepreneur to grow further, grow faster, be riskier than the entrepreneur is comfortable with themselves. And if you have a choice as to how you fund your business, then that's worth remembering, I think. And it's also worth remembering another consequence of that is tied up in there somewhere is why venture capitalists, for example, only fund a tiny minority of business opportunities that are out there, and that includes good ones. What's good for a venture capitalist is not necessarily good for an entrepreneur. What VCs are turned on by is not what you and I are turned on by, which doesn't mean it's a crap business idea or bad opportunity. It just means it doesn't suit the VC mindset. And so much that's written in the newspapers, so much that you hear in lectures, so much of what happens in a business school is predicated on an assumption that we all want to create unicorns. No, we don't. We all want to be in technology. Do we? I don't. That we all want to make $1 million is the question that this whole conversation is predicated on. Do I? I'm quite happy with 500 grand. Thank you very much. And we all assume that there is entrepreneurship means one thing, and it doesn't. It means a whole host of different things for different people. Interested that Alenka is taking our thinking very much towards intrapreneurship. That's a valid view. It's not one I happen to share, incidentally. I think that intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship are quite different from each other in many ways. And but for you, it might seed some thinking as to what it is that you want to do with your life and your career going forward. But for other people, the whole point about entrepreneurship is to get out from the carapaces and constrictions of a big corporation and do your own thing in your own way, rather than to do it according to somebody else's tune. Anybody else has questions? Or okay, then I can ask my question.
I have another question.
Yeah, go on.
That's okay.
Me and Tyra are getting on just fine here. The rest of you can go. We'll just have a one-to-one for the next few minutes or so.
Well, yeah. So yes, another question is okay. So, what's your thoughts about the age? Well, not the age requirement, but the kind of age threshold for starting up a new business. Is there studies, or are there higher risks starting up new businesses at a later stage in life compared to when you're young and have a spring in your step?
Well, there's a lot of evidence out there that suggests that businesses created by older people are more likely to be successful than businesses created by younger people. That businesses created by older people are more likely to grow further and faster than businesses created by younger people. There's a presumption in the popular press that entrepreneurs are young, that they're male, that they're in technology, that they've got beards, that they are funded by venture capitalists, that they probably live in California. I'm being extreme here, but of course these are just prejudices. It's not true. And one of those prejudices is that entrepreneurship is a young man's game. It's not a man's game, it's a person's game, and it's not even a young game. There is evidence, as I say, to suggest that leave it till later and you're more likely to be successful. And you can rationalize that too. Most entrepreneurial opportunities, I suggest, come to you off the back of something that you know, off the back of your own experience. And if you've got some experience, then it helps in identifying an opportunity in the first place. Yeah, sorry, I'll stop there.